strategy for the industry. Mr Speaker, Britain was the country that created the railways, but that legacy is being trashed by a Conservative government content to oversee its managed decline. So will the Minister and the Secretary of State finally take responsibility, put aside their ideological approach to opposition to supporting British business, and finally step up for the people of Derby, for Newton Aycliffe and for Britain's railways?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, the Honourable Lady says, will the Secretary of State take responsibility and work on this matter? He's doing that right now. He's about to start a meeting with the Chief Executive Chairman. And it's not the first meeting, Mr Speaker. He has held 8 meetings with Alstom and also 8 with Hitachi to look to provide solutions. Our officials in the Department for Transport have worked incredibly hard, as has everybody in the whole Derby family, in terms of the train operator, the unions who I've met and the workforce. We are all rowing together to try and find a solution. I have to say, Mr Speaker, it doesn't help when we see this cause being used almost like a political football. As an example for that, I did not say that individuals are to be dealt with in terms of peaks and troughs. I said that the procurement cycle leads to that. My words were clear on Hansard, and I resent having them misinterpreted, because again it impacts people and their feelings, and I find it quite irresponsible when the opposition do just this. Another example of getting the facts completely wrong is the continued mention of HS2. To be clear, the order for HS2 was for 54 trains. That order remains at 54 trains because they were always for phase 1, which is going ahead. The schedule remains the same, the number of trains remains the same. So let's deal with the facts rather than the fiction and the scaremongering that I hear so often. And again, when it comes to facts, just relay this. 3 of the 4 train manufacturers that we proudly have in this country came here since 2010 under this Conservative government building their plant. No doubt they decided to do so because we have commissioned 8,000 new rolling stock vehicles since 2012. The average age of rolling stock was 21 years back in 2016. It's now under 17 years because we are investing in rolling stock, and there will be more orders, but it's a complex legal solution that requires sensible minds, and I'm very proud the Secretary of State is leading to that endeavour.
Chair of the Select Committee, Ian Stewart.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm very pleased that the Secretary of State and the Minister are taking charge of negotiations with Alstom, Hitachi and others. And I appreciate that as these commercially sensitive discussions are ongoing, he is constrained in what he can say. But they need to be resolved soon. But the wider issue is the peaks and troughs, not just in rolling stock procurement, but in railway industry investment more generally. So can I ask the Minister to state how he believes GBR and wider rail reform will help smooth out these peaks and troughs in the longer term?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the Chair of the Select Committee? The committee as a whole have looked at this issue and have really probed in terms of solutions. And they are also, to the GBR point, providing the body of pre-legislative scrutiny for rail reform, and I thank him and his committee for the work they're doing to that endeavour. He's absolutely right that a more holistic approach with the railway, where we have track and train integrated, will help make further decisions into the future and give more certainty in terms of the orders. But I have set out the orders that have been taken over the preceding years. I do believe there is a healthy order book, and we will be looking to get those tenders out this year and next for the train operators that I've mentioned.
SNP spokesperson Gavin Newlands.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I pass on my condolences to you and your family for the loss of your father? Clearly, the news coming out of Derby about the precarious nature of Alstom is grim news, not just for the workers and the wider economy of Derby, but for everyone involved in the supply chain across the country, including 24,000 jobs in rail supply in Scotland. But the fact that this was predicted, Minister, we've all known about this for months. And these are skilled, well-paying jobs of the type we're continually told the UK is in the market for. So does he accept that the stop-start procurement of new rolling stock is a direct result of the fragmented and disconnected railway system that has placed financialisation and the Treasury's miserly attitude to investment above rail's key role in a decarbonised 21st century society? Why have Roscoe's ruling the roost rather than straightforward procurement? And how is it possible, Mr Speaker, that the island that invented the modern railway, in fact the 200th anniversary of the Stockton and Darlington railways next year, could have next to zero train production capacity within a matter of months? We need a proper rail strategy and integration. So can the Minister tell us when that rail reform will be put before this House?
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Again, just sort of look at the facts. So since 2012, 8,000 new rolling stock vehicles have been manufactured. That's out of a total of 15,600. So it is a relatively young fleet, and taking into account that fleet tends to last 35, 40 years, and it now has an average of 17 years. I hope he will see that there has been a substantial investment from the government, from the UK taxpayer and private train operators into rolling stock. He asked me when the legislation will be brought forward for rail reform, and I'm very keen that it is. It's on its journey right now. So the Transport Select Committee, of which he is a leading member, are providing the pre-legislative scrutiny. I very much hope they will finish their work in time for the summer recess. There'll be 2 months for us to respond, and I very much hope there will be cross-party support from both houses for what I believe is sensible legislation that will allow us to deliver rail reform.
Polly Latham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whilst Labour are playing party politics on this issue, it's a really important issue for Derby and Derbyshire and the supply chain. It's the workers that work for Alstom. It's the supply chain that feeds into Alstom. Could the Minister confirm that Conservative members of Parliament have been working with the Secretary of State over the whole period, and that he has been working with Alstom for many, many months to get this right?
Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend, because as she knows well, and indeed my honourable friend for Derby North knows well, the amount of work that they've put in, pressing us, doing so privately but firmly, to make sure that we're working on this, because the concern is their concern as constituency MPs, and I couldn't credit them enough in terms of the amount of work that's gone in on their side, and for doing so sensibly. And that also includes those in Derby Council as well, to whom we are grateful. I believe this is the way to approach it. And the number of meetings we've had, the cross-departmental task force that is in place, the sheer amount of hours that the officials have put in, have all led us to a point where we very much hope that we will be able to provide a solution. The matter is complex, there are legal challenges, and often these type of contracts end up in litigation. So we have to be very careful with the process, but we are very keen to find that solution. I thank them both for their work.
Dame Margaret Beckett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm disappointed and sorry to hear what the Honourable Lady has just said, because as she knows perfectly well, there has been a substantial amount of cross-party working on this issue over many months and years. And I find it a little disappointing that although I am told there have been many meetings between the Secretary of State and local Conservative members, at no point has he or his office chosen to involve me, since the factory is in my constituency. However, that doesn't matter at all. What really matters, and what I find most difficult about this whole issue, is that we have had so many of these conversations over the years I have been in this House about failing industries where, what are the prospects for the future, and there's a struggle, and as always there's an argument between those who want to look to the long term and those who want short-term financial savings. This is not an industry where that is the problem. Yeah. In the longer term, there are going to be millions of pounds of orders for rolling stock, because there is rolling stock renewal needed right across the country, as everybody in the rail industry is aware. This is an industry with prospects, with an ongoing realistic vision of secure, high-value, high-reward jobs, and yet one where, I'm afraid, government inaction is putting those jobs at risk, particularly, as has been said a moment ago, on both sides of the House, in the supply chain.
Here, here.
Well, can I thank the Right Honourable Member for the points that she raises. And when I refer to the discussions that have been held, they have been cross-party. So the leader of Derby Council has worked very closely with the department to try and find a solution and broker that as well. I will take the matter she mentions in terms of meetings. I don't have that to hand, but I will ensure that she gets the right meeting that she asked for. But the point I was making more was the points from the front bench just don't help matters at all, because this is a sensitive, commercial and legally challenging situation that we are trying to find a way through. We cannot just find contracts just for one train manufacturer. We have 4, and it has to be an open process, otherwise the matter ends up in court. But despite that, we are doing everything we can to find the right orders for those train manufacturers. So as well as the letter that I've written to all of the manufacturers, to specify the tender pipeline to come. The Secretary of State has also written to all those entities who finance train operators, with a point being made that they should bring forward matters that they can see, which will also help in terms of refurbishment as well as new rolling stock.
Jason McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Rail Minister for the huge levels of rail investment going into my Colne Valley constituency. Alongside my honourable friends for Dewsbury and Penistone and Stocksbridge, as he knows, we secured £48 million of levelling up cash for the Penistone line for upgrades there, with stations at Honley and Brockholes in my constituency. And can I thank him for visiting Huddersfield Railway Station last year, and I'm pleased to report now the major upgrade as part of the £11 billion Trans-Pennine Rail upgrade is underway at Huddersfield Railway Station, and once that is complete there'll be major upgrades to Slough and Marsden stations, including disabled access. Rail investment is being delivered to my wonderful part of West Yorkshire.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank my honourable friend? He's an absolute champion of the railway, and it was an absolute delight to go and visit him at Huddersfield Station and talk about some of these projects. And of course, it's completely relevant to the matter before us. The Trans-Pennine route upgrade, for which there will be more government investment in that upgrade than there has been for the entirety of Crossrail, is also itself allowing us to put an order in for Trans-Pennine Express trains. So there'll be more trains being manufactured, as well as better stations, longer platforms, more resilience. And I want to thank that team that are doing a brilliant job. The Sunday Times highlighted it. Rather than chuntering, it would be nice if the opposition thanked those who deliver railway projects to time and budget.
Ray Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my condolences on your loss. Can I thank you, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the workforce for granting this UQ, because the situation is becoming critical. My union, Unite the Union, tell me that there are over 900 people employed on temporary contracts at Hitachi in Newton Aycliffe and at Alstom in Derby, whose jobs are already at risk. And this is before any formal redundancies occur, and Unite believe this could happen as soon as June. I'm well aware the Minister knows the industry needs a steady stream of orders to sustain train manufacturing here in the UK and preserve these vital jobs in areas like County Durham, where we don't have an abundance of skilled employment. So I say in all honesty, can I earnestly ask the Minister to use his good offices to persuade the Secretary of State to intervene urgently and ensure a bright future for this vital UK train manufacturing industry.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly take that point from my good friend. The honourable member works tirelessly for the rail workforce, and I know that he means everything he says with passion and conviction. What I would say is that when I talk about the situation being a complex one from a legal perspective, I've just taken back to the contract award for HS2, which went to Alstom and Hitachi. That was challenged in court by Siemens. The department succeeded on every single point, but it just shows how careful we have to be from a legal perspective at the tendering process, because it will end up in litigation. And the worst thing to do would be to hand out contracts in a manner which wouldn't be legally fair, find that they are then unpicked, and then that brings fresh uncertainty. Instead, we're looking at the entire order book to see where we can bring matters forward, which would be matters that Alstom may be working on already, where that pipeline is the fair and right thing to do. Then we're looking to see if we can bring those contract orders forward.
Maggie Throop.
Mr. Speaker, the situation at Alstom is of great concern to a number of my constituents who work there. However, I probably have even more constituents who work in the supply chain. So will my honourable friend reassure me and my constituents that whatever the outcome is of today's discussions, that the supply chain will not be forgotten?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend, the member for Eros, is absolutely right, because this isn't just the jobs at the manufacturing plants in Derby that we're talking about, it's also all the jobs through the supply chain. I work really closely with the supply chain and indeed their trade representatives, so REA and Rail Future, and I'm keen to continue to do so. So very much our work and our endeavour trying to find a solution is not just a solution for the workforce in Derby working directly for Alstom, it's also for those who are temporarily employed at Alstom and the entire supply chain as well. And that's why the Secretary of State is meeting Alstom right now, so that we can try and find a solution for them all.
We're a Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's inaction to sign off new orders for trains is now also threatening hundreds of jobs in County Durham and wiping millions of pounds off the value of rail manufacturing companies. Inadequate supply to our rail infrastructure will have a big impact on decarbonising the UK transport system. Is the Minister aware of that? And what is the government doing long-term to invest in our rail infrastructure?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government, thanks to the UK taxpayers, invested over £100 billion in the railways, and a lot of that has gone through to rolling stock. As I've mentioned, the rolling stock is now under 17 years as an average life cycle. Rolling stock does go to 35, 40 years. In terms of the future, I'll give her a sort of good example of where the future is bright, and it's with innovation and technology. So Great Western have just completed a battery trial for a train that's covered 86 miles with stops as well, just with one single charge. So my hope is that as well as new orders for trains, we'll also find new solutions for that manufacturing rolling stock, which is greener than it is right now.
Peter Gibson.
My condolences to you. Many of my constituents in Darlington are involved in rail manufacturing, both at Hitachi and in the wider supply chain, and are genuinely concerned about the situation. So can my right honourable friend reassure me and my constituents that this situation is getting the full attention of the Secretary of State, and can he outline to the House why the issue isn't as simple as the stroke of a pen as alleged by the party opposite?
Mr. Speaker, I can give my honourable friend, the member for Darlington, that assurance. And he's absolutely right. It is a complex matter, and it's important that we get this right. But we are working with Alstom, with the Council and with all other parties. Actually, I should just correct my own record, Mr. Speaker. My understanding, and I'm very happy to take this up with the right honourable member, the member for Derby South, that I believe she met with the Secretary of State for an hour on the 25th of March. Where she said she had. So that is correct. Good. I'm glad I've got that now on the record. But my honourable friend is absolutely right. It's complex, it's challenging, but I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, and the House, that the Secretary of State is working full pelt on this matter with Alstom, and I'm hopeful a solution will be found which will demonstrate all of that hard work.
Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Derby's Litchurch Lane is unique, the only site in the UK that designs, develops, builds and tests trains, and has already been acknowledged, the Alstom factory is a very significant employer, but also supports thousands of supply chain jobs, particularly good jobs, particularly in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire. This government, frankly, will never be forgiven if it's allowed to close due to an entirely avoidable gap in orders. Now, the Minister says it's complex, but my question is simple. When does the Department for Transport intend to issue the invitations to tender for the promised new train fleets for Chiltern, Northern and South Eastern?
The answer to that, Mr. Speaker, is over the course of this year and next year for all of those train manufacturers that she mentions. And I well remember the visit both she and I had when there was a Transport Select Committee visit to the site. It is a fantastic site, as she rightly says, which is why we are working to find a solution. And I'm certainly encouraged by the conversations that have taken place. We know that everyone wants to find that solution. The government certainly does. But she will know through all her work on the Transport Select Committee that legal challenges have to be dealt with in the correct manner. It is very sensitive. It's market sensitive as well. And so therefore finding a way through that provides that certainty and doesn't get unpicked is absolutely right for us to do. And that's what we are doing right now.
Nigel Mills.
The threat to the Alstom factory in Derby is of great concern to the employees in Amber Valley and those employed by the supply chain, and their mood's not helped by the fact this doesn't appear to be a problem of the quality of the trains or even the price of the train, but it appears to be a problem of compliance with the procurement rules we ourselves put in place only a year or so ago. So could I just urge the Minister, if it comes down to a choice of having every I dotted and every T crossed, or having that factory saved for the long term, can I urge that we take the risk on the contract and sort that out later and save the factory, rather than prioritise the contract and risk losing the factory?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend, sort of in the way he describes it, it's a careful balance. But I will reiterate that if we were to award contracts that are outside of the usual process, then firstly there's other workforces that are impacted as well. Those in Newport, we've mentioned those up in Newton Aycliffe, and also those up in the Hull area. So we have to take into account all of the workforce as well as the fair process with regards to the contract. But as he mentions, there are trains being manufactured right now, rolling off the production line up in Derby. So South West trains, Midland trains, good quality trains. As I said to him, the challenge is that we've produced a lot of trains over the years. What I really want to do is to help those train manufacturers export more, because then that will fill up the order book. So they're not just reliant on the domestic market, because as it gets fresher and younger in terms of its rolling stock years, then we need to find a solution outside of this country.
Andy MacDonald.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. My condolences to you. The Minister talks about this being a complex issue, but isn't it rather simple? These companies will not be around to enjoy the sort of exporting opportunities that he talks about if they don't sustain. And in answer to my honourable friend from Nottingham, can you just apply his mind to what he just said about the invitations to tender? If it's going to take that long to issue those tenders, people are not going to be around. It's not about them not competing, it's about being able to compete and be here. So can you not recognise that the constant chopping and changing to procurement in the rail industry has landed us in this terrible position today?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't accept that, because earlier on this year, when I met with the train manufacturers previously, and they said they wanted sort of longer-term certainty. So the reason for setting out what was coming up next is to give that. And of course, there are sort of train manufacturing going on right now. We've just seen the award, for example, to CAF of the 10 LNER tri-mode trains as well. So there is manufacturing, there are contracts being awarded, but I know I'm repeating myself, but as the train rolling stock gets younger in age, because it has a life of 35 to 40 years, the average life is now under 17 years, then by definition, there are few orders that would then tend to go through. But it is important that we actually have that sort of future pipeline, and that's why I mentioned those orders going to tender for this year and next.
Matt Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hitachi provides opportunities in high-skilled jobs benefiting people from right across the North East, including a number in my own Stockton South constituency. Can my right honourable friend confirm he'll continue to look at every possible option to protect these jobs and the North East's incredible manufacturing capabilities?
Yes,
yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. And the team at Hitachi, as well as Alstom, will of course be working on the HS2 tender, which will be coming their way for 54 trains. So I'm really keen to meet with them. I met with Hitachi yesterday, albeit a different arm, more on the signalling side of things. I'm keen to work with the private sector. We're very proud of the train manufacturers that we have in this country. We want to make sure that they sustain and they continue to not only get contracts from this country, but as I mentioned previously, I really want to see exports, which is why I tend to go abroad, so I can actually help champion those exports in those markets for them.
Sean Warren.
Thank you. In 1823, Robert Stevenson and Company set up the world's first locomotive factory in my constituency. Is this the Conservative idea of an anniversary present to the North East, the end of 200 years of railway manufacturing and innovation? He says it's complex and challenging, but for the sake of Hitachi workers and for our entire region, will he commit to the future of railway manufacturing in the North East?
Speaker, these are private sector companies who, of course, rely on government-funded contracts, but ultimately they're private sector companies, and it's a matter for them. Our job is to support them, and I've already described the order book that we've put through since 2012. And of course, any government or government in waiting would actually have to follow the correct process that we do with our officials to do things properly, and it's rather telling that the opposition don't seem to know how proper governance operates. And again, I'll just remind her, in 2010, 3 of the 4 train manufacturers that we have built their plants under a Conservative government because they know that this government is good for business, and this government, as £100 billion demonstrates since 2010, invests in the railways as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the Member of Parliament for Sedgefield, which incorporates the Newton Aycliffe Hitachi factory, which has already been mentioned, is the home of the railways. 200 years ago, the first train went on the line just next to the Hitachi factory. We are founded in railways, we want to be in railways, and we always will be in railways. The situation you've got at the moment, though, is that our opposition are taking this as a political football. As the members just said about that, everybody's saying that it's so simple, it's a stroke of a pen. It wasn't the stroke of a pen when Nexus had the situation in Newcastle. No, it wasn't, and you had the pen then. Sorry, the opposition party had the pen then, Mr. Speaker. But anyway, right here, right now, I am very concerned about what's happening with Hitachi, as I am obviously with Alstom and with the supply chains. I've met the unions, I've met Unite several times and will continue to do so. It's important that we're all engaged in this properly and confidentially where appropriate. I've been completely irritated by the number of times that the opposition is saying that the government is not engaged. For most of the time I've been engaging with them confidentially, as Hitachi asked. We've had everybody, including the Prime Minister, has been to Hitachi to understand what exactly the situation is. What we need now is the unions to be engaged. We've got Hitachi to use all of their innovation and skills. And can I just ask the Minister to make sure that he is fully engaged and explain to the opposition if it was so easy, why wouldn't we just do it?
Mr. Speaker, can I thank my honourable friend, the member for Sedgefield, because as he puts it himself, but he's being too modest, he is working with us constantly to ensure that Hitachi's concerns are addressed. We've met with Hitachi a number of times and we have great faith in the leadership there and work very closely with them. They, of course, are not consulting on any changes to workforce at the moment. As I've mentioned, they are sharing the order for the 54 HS2 trains. And he's absolutely right. The way that we will fix these issues is to give certainty through in terms of the tenders that are coming forward, to continue to invest, to try and get more exports to these train operations and to work together collegiately and not in terms of scare stories. So that's something I'm determined to do, and I thank him for the work he does to that end.
Alex Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, this is political because this government have got formed in failing industry in the North East. They abandoned primary steel making on Teesside. They failed to back local investors in the Sirius mine. They allowed the world-renowned Cleveland Bridge and Engineering to collapse despite promises to save it. And now they're at it again. And this time it will affect countless people from my own constituency home to the first passenger railway. Hitachi, in a statement just an hour ago, said they wanted to continue to explore solutions so the skills and investment they have in the region are retained. There is no doubt, Mr. Speaker, these are at considerable risk today. Is the Minister really prepared to fail Hitachi and provide yet another example of how the Tories have abandoned the North East?
Speaker, I find that argument gets slightly punctured by the fact that Hitachi built their plant after the Conservative government came into power, because they understand that we support business, attract business and want them to succeed not only with domestic orders but also their export orders. And to say we're abandoning, when I've just described the fact that we have 8,000 new rolling stock vehicles produced since 2012 and the average age has gone down from 21 years to 16.8 years, rather demonstrates that he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Thanks,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is absolutely right that this is a complex scenario, but there really is no need for us to be in one of the troughs in the supply chain at the moment. We've got Chiltern Railways, which has massive overcrowding because it's got the oldest fleet in the stock and they are desperate for more trains on that network. And we have East West Rail about to launch with borrowed diesel trains rather than new hybrids or hydrogen trains which are fit for the modern age. So can I ask my honourable friend, as he looks to what can be brought forward, to prioritise Chiltern and to prioritise getting trains onto East West Rail that people want to see?
Mr. Speaker, I know that my honourable friend, another excellent member of the Transport Select Committee, has written to the Secretary of State, and we are lining up a meeting so we can discuss Chiltern's rolling stock. He knows that I'm very keen that there's a solution found with regards to some rolling stock that is available, and that's what I'm looking to take forward. He asked about the situation with East West Rail. The consultation will go forward this summer, and I referenced the testing of a battery-powered train that went for 86 miles. I believe that the route from Oxford to Cambridge is 84 miles, so that would suggest that could be the answer to the point that he rightly makes.
British Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, I've been the chair of the all-party group on manufacturing for some time. I actually worked in manufacturing at one stage, and I represent a fine Huddersfield, despite other claims in this House. I am the Member of Parliament at Huddersfield, a fine manufacturing town. But can I say to him, this is about job losses. And is he aware that under this government, Since 2010, the manufacturing sector in our country has been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. It's now only less than 10% of people in this country make anything. That is a dire situation. And not only is it rail, it's defence. I represent a town that makes the engines for tanks and for guns and ships and all that sort of stuff, but they don't get the orders in time. The fact of the matter is, all our wonderful manufacturing towns and cities are in peril under this government, and what's he going to do about it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it was the same Huddersfield that I went and visited because I was with the team from the Trans-Pennine route upgrade, where we are investing £9 to £11.5 billion upgrading that route, which will make it not only better for rail passengers, but will also and is providing thousands of jobs, the bulk of which are within the local workforce as well. And they're very proud of that, of the Trans-Pennine route upgrade team. So again, that rather demonstrates that what the honourable member has just stated is not backed up by the facts.
Sam Terry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during the pandemic, it was quite clear the government rightly stepped in to support train operating companies through huge subsidy. That essentially meant subsidising the profits of those companies. The Minister also knows that Roscoe's, rolling stock companies, have been, since the time of British Rail, been privatised, a highly profitable and lucrative business. Actually, in my view, has had very little value for the taxpayer whatsoever. So I wonder, Mr. Speaker, whether the Minister can consider two things. One, actually, in this situation for Hitachi and for Alstom, to seriously consider direct government intervention to stop these companies going to the wall before they can actually get the next orders in, and to urgently convene a meeting of local businesses in both those areas with all of the rail unions, from Unite to TSA to ASF to RMT, bring them together to actually discuss how we jointly work together to make sure that our brilliant and long sort of held highly skilled workforce are not just thrown on the scrap heap for decades to come.
Well, Mr. Speaker, a lot of the finance that I talked about and the orders that have been brought forward, which is why we have a relatively young fleet, is because we've had train operators that have been able to use their own balance sheet in order to invest. Now, of course, since the pandemic, rail finance is only back to about 80% of where they were pre-COVID due to the changes in working patterns, then that has been more of a challenge, which is why the government and the taxpayer takes on more of the burden. In terms of the meeting with the unions, I should just reference the meeting I had with union representatives from Alstom and Workforce, who were absolutely superb. And I found that the way they wanted to do their business in a sensible, calm, but of course, they challenge, and rightly they do. That provides us with the motivation to try and intervene and deliver a solution. And that's what the Secretary of State is doing right now.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The potential loss of jobs at Hitachi in the North East will hit the North East economy as a whole, and it's absolutely vital that we maintain this rail manufacturing capability there. So what is the government going to do to make sure that we don't lose that facility because there's a gap in orders? What will the government be doing to ensure that that doesn't happen and to save those jobs?
Mr. Speaker, so it's important to note that Hitachi are not currently consulting on any changes in workforce, but they of course are concerned, and they speak to honourable members in this place for those concerns to be put through to us, and I welcome that approach as well. Again, in terms of what are we doing, so those train operators where their rolling stock is older and needs renewing, we are putting those out to market, so that's Trans-Pennine, that's Northern, that's South Eastern, that's Chiltern. And bringing those orders through will obviously assist. But again, I come back to the export part. If our fleet is getting younger, and it means that there won't be as many orders, then we really need to see that our 4 great train manufacturers being able to export more abroad so that that delivers for UK PLC.
Mike Ainsbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What further discussions is the Minister and Secretary of State going to have with the manufacturing and rail unions on this matter?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've already stated that I've met with the Alstom unions myself. I'm always very happy to meet with the unions, as indeed they need to do so. But at the moment, our work is with both Derby Council and, more importantly, with Alstom, who will ultimately make the decision. They're a private operator in terms of their business, and it will be the decision for them. But what we want to do is to show them what we can do to assist in terms of orders and other assistance, and that's why we've been working across government to provide that reassurance, so that we sort of work towards them not only keeping their plant but also investing further in it and bringing more of their enterprise to the UK.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Minister for his answers.
I don't think anybody in the House could doubt the Minister's commitment or government's commitment to improving things, and we thank them for that. Can the Minister outline what strategy government has to support manufacturing companies throughout the United Kingdom to make improvements to attract business and sustain contracts? And will government commit to ensuring that all government contracts are fulfilled with British manufactured products as standard to give confidence to investment in British manufacturing? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Look, I thank the honourable member. He always puts his points with such sort of kindness, but also consideration, and he actually makes better points as a result than some that get chucked around here. In terms of the answer to him, I can provide him the assurance that by writing, as I did, to the train manufacturers and meeting with them, listening to them saying they wanted the certainty, they wanted to know what the pipeline is, and we've been working with the Treasury to bring that pipeline forward. And then the Secretary of State's letter adds another angle, because what we're doing there is writing to the Roscoes to finance train refurbishments to see if those can be brought forward as well. So we're doing everything we can from our side within the difficult legal and commercial situation that we can find ourselves in, to do things correctly, to bring those orders through, to give more certainty so that those companies will continue to invest in the UK.
That completes the urgent question. We now come to the 10-minute rule motion. Theresa Villiers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to provide for the prohibition of the sale in England of horticultural peat by the end of 2024, to provide for certain exemptions to that prohibition and for connected purposes. Mr. Speaker, peatlands are the UK's largest carbon store. They contain more carbon than the forests of UK, France and Germany combined. And they're home to some of our most iconic and rarest wildlife, such as the bittern, the swallowtail butterfly, the short-eared owl and the hen harrier. But less than 20% of our peatlands are in a near-natural state. 87% of England's deep peat areas are degraded, damaged or dried out. This is caused by a range of factors, including overgrazing and drainage for agriculture, but also because of extraction for compost and other growing media for gardening and horticulture. Extraction degrades the state of the wider landscape, damaging wildlife habitats and reducing peat's capacity to prevent flooding and filter water. And of course, extraction means that stored carbon is released, contributing to climate change. So this bill would implement the 2022 commitment made by this government to prohibit the use of peat products in amateur gardening in England by the end of this year. In 2011, DEFRA announced support for phasing out peat products, with a commitment to legislate if a voluntary approach proved to be ineffective. The government's 2021 consultation received more than 5,000 responses, 95% of which supported a ban on retail peat sales. The Royal Horticultural Society is backed to ban, and Professor Alistair Griffiths, its Director of Science and Collections, said in 2022, peatlands are the world's largest carbon store on land, with great potential to store carbon long-term, helping to reach net zero. To tackle the climate and biodiversity crises, it's essential that we have a sustainable transition to peat-free alternative growing medias. The RHS stopped selling peat-based growing media bags in 2019 and will continue to work with DEFRA, industry and gardeners to accelerate the transition to peat-free. Mr. Speaker, we take pride as a gardening nation, and the COVID lockdown triggered increased enthusiasm for this great outdoor activity. There's already been a big shift to non-peat compost products, thanks to the efforts of the horticulture industry, to DEFRA ministers, to campaigners like Monty Don, and thanks to responsible choices made by gardeners. But peat can still lurk in gardening products such as potted houseplants and trays of bedding plants. The presence of peat in these products is rarely labelled, meaning even the most ecologically committed gardener may not know it's there. Even the most effective information campaign can only go so far in changing behaviour. So I think gardeners should be able to buy from a garden centre without fear that their purchase will harm the environment elsewhere. There are now reasonably priced peat-free compost using materials such as bark, coir and bracken. And thanks to a decision by the Environment Minister, solid digestate from anaerobic digestion will soon become another source of peat-free growing media. Peat alternatives for products like potted plants are also available. Companies like B&Q have gone peat-free, as has Kew Gardens, and the Royal Horticultural Society is 98% of the way there, which the consumer organisation excludes peat-based compost from its product comparisons. While it acknowledged that some peat-free products do cost more, it believes that there is now a good range of lower-cost options on the market. The horticulture industry has had since 2011 to prepare for the phase-out of peat. 13 years on, some real progress has been made. Peat use more than halved between 2020 and the end of 2022, including a reduction of nearly 70% in the amateur sector. In 2022, professional use of peat fell below 50% of their total consumption of growing media for the first time. But UK horticulture still used 950,000 cubic metres of peat in 2022, including 471,000 cubic metres in the retail sector. I acknowledge that only a comparatively small proportion of the UK's peat is affected by extraction for horticultural purposes, but by targeting the demand for peat, we can help keep it in the ground both here and overseas, preventing damaging release of carbon. As well as an immediate ban on peat products for retail use by the general public, this bill would give ministers power to use secondary legislation to extend that ban to professional horticulture on a future date. This reflects the fact that there are still barriers to be overcome before we can be confident that reasonably priced peat-free products and production materials are available in the professional sector. But we need progress there too, and I would urge the government to press ahead with a clear timetable for full transition to peat-free products across the horticulture sector. Limited exceptions to the ban will be needed, some of which may need to be permanent, for example, in relation to science and research and rare plants. But the 2030 target has been on the table for over a decade, and I call on both the industry and the government to ensure meaningful change is delivered by the time we reach that 2030 milestone. So UK horticulture moves into its peat-free future, and we seize the opportunity to become a global leader in supply of sustainable compost and growing media. So in conclusion, this bill needs to be just one part of a wider strategy to achieve the government's ambitious target to restore 35,000 hectares of peat by the end of 2025. This United Kingdom is custodian of 3 million hectares of peatland habitats. That includes 13% of the world's blanket bog, a globally rare ecosystem protected by international treaties, one example of which I was pleased to visit in County Fermanagh back in 2014. More money is now being invested in peat protection and restoration than ever before. Growers can apply for funding for the equipment they need to transition away from peat. DEFRA's 2021 Peatland Action Plan is backed by 50 million from the Nature for Climate Fund, a fund which I was pleased to secure a commitment to in the Conservative 2019 manifesto. And the work has been taking place on projects such as the Great North Bog and at Rookup in the North Pennines, which I visited on a bitterly cold, windy day back in 2020 with a local MP, my right honourable friend for North West Durham. Perhaps even more significant than the Nature for Climate Fund commitment is that England's new Elms Farm Support Schemes embrace peatland restoration, potentially meeting a major long-term flow of funding for this vital task stretching into the future. Not only does peat play a vital environmental role in our distinctive island habitat, it's also part of Britain's history, identity and culture. Landscape ecological planner Jennifer Dowdall described it as a grand encyclopedia, a storehouse of pollen that can help us understand our ecological history and the changing climate. Peat's miraculous capacity to preserve organic material has meant that it can offer up evidence of the gruesome practices of our ancestors when so-called bog bodies are discovered thousands of years after these men and women met a grisly end. And Seamus Heaney was just one of several poets and writers to reflect on the deep, rich peatland earth of these islands. Removing peat from amateur gardening gives this House the opportunity to recognise the value of that cultural and ecological heritage, to take active and practical steps to protect and restore precious natural habitats, and to take us closer to our goal of reaching net zero and preventing disastrous climate change. And Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
That the right honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. Sir Christopher Chope.
Mr. Speaker, I don't object to my right honourable friend having the right to bring in the bill, but I think it's important to put on record that when the bill is brought forward, it will not go unopposed, because I think that much of the content of this bill, which my right honourable friend has described, seems to be disproportionate, not based on science or fact, and another exercise in gesture politics. And if we remember today, it's going to be another day when the banners seem to want to get out there and destroy legitimate activities that other people are engaged in. And I would like to put in a plea on behalf of amateur and professional horticulturalists, because those who have been to plant centres over the last year or so will have noticed that the move to peat-free products has resulted in the quality of those products declining significantly. Their longevity has declined because they do not have the natural water retention in their pots, which is provided by peat and cannot be substituted by peat substitutes. And so the consequence of that is that it's becoming increasingly difficult for our own domestic horticultural industry to be able to cope with the pressures to reduce peat consumption. And by contrast, Mr. Speaker, we know that almost all our products coming through garden centres at the moment and being planted out in gardens and flower boxes across the country, that a very high proportion of those products come from the Netherlands. And the Netherlands, what is the Netherlands doing about this issue of peat? And the latest figures that I've been able to ascertain show that in 2020, the Netherlands imported 2,156 million kilos of peat. And 44.5% of that came from Germany, 9.5% from Estonia, 9.2% from Latvia, 7% or so from Lithuania, and 5% from Belgium. And what happened to that peat? It was then put into plants which were exported to countries such as the United Kingdom, thereby creating an unfair advantage compared with our own homegrown industries. And my right honourable friend seems to want to go beyond the voluntary approach and to ban professional horticulturalists in this country from being able to use peat in the production of plants, thereby facilitating even greater unfair competition coming from the Dutch. And peat, what proportion of peat is actually used in horticulture? A very small proportion, Mr. Speaker. I'm told that about 95% of the peat that is consumed in the world is used for peat fires and is put into domestic boilers. It's also put into mega incinerators and is a substitute for coal or even natural gas. And I concede that use of peat is extremely dirty. But why is it that we are just concentrating on one particular niche industry in our country, namely horticulture, and ignoring the much larger problem around the burning of peat as fuel. And I looked up this morning whether it would be possible in this country to buy peat for fuel. And there is a company which is offering to provide me with a pallet of 25 kilos of peat for no less than £235. So you can buy peat in this country for fuel. Why are we trying to concentrate on banning peat in horticulture where there is no real substitute? Some people talk about coir as being a substitute, but coir, the production of coir is mainly carried out in the Far East and in particular in Sri Lanka. That coir has to be washed and desalted before it can be prepared for horticultural use. It then has to be transported halfway across the world, and it is not an ecologically friendly way of producing a peat substitute. And my right honourable friend, the noble Lord Benyon, who deals with these issues in the other place, I think was spot on when he said in a debate in the other place last year, in answer to a question from Baroness Humphreys, who was concerned about the lack of a level playing field for EU imports, he said, the noble Baroness asked a very important question. We could act unilaterally, which would result in the export of jobs, skills and benefit to our economy to countries which are not bringing in measures as rigorous as we are. We want to ensure that we are operating this in the same way as we buy timber, where we recognise the impact we are having globally as well as nationally. We are seeing a massive reduction in the use of peat and we want to see it end. We have set forth a clear timetable for that to happen. The target of 2026 with certain exemptions will mean that there will be a tiny amount left which will continue to be used. That will maintain some key areas of our food security, such as mushroom production. And he could have added blueberry production, because peat, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is very acidic, and that is why if you try growing blueberries in non-acidic soil, you'll find that they die very quickly. And the noble Lord Benyon then went on to say that in answer to Lord Curry of Kirkharle, he said, in every policy area there's an unintended consequence unless we fully consider it. In producing alternative media, there is sometimes a cost to the environment. If we are buying coir from abroad, what impact is that having on some very vulnerable parts of the world? There are many other growing media with which we have to ensure that in our determination to protect our remaining wetlands and peatlands, we are not exporting the problem and causing problems further afield. It's a very difficult issue, as the noble Lord has recognised, and I assure him that we are all across the subject. Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm concerned that we are not going to be all across the subject if this bill goes through, as proposed by my right honourable friend, unopposed, because what we need to do is we need to make sure that any legislation on this is balanced and proportionate and takes into proper account the needs of our homegrown horticultural industry.
The question is that the right honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Selene Saxby, Chris Grayling, Miss Sarah Dines, Robin Miller, Andrew Selous, Dr Therese Coffey, Tim Lawton, Tracy Crouch, Sally Ann Hart, Trudy Harrison, Siobhan Bailey, and myself, sir.
Teresa Villiers.
Horticultural peat prohibition of sale bill.
Second reading what day?
26th of April, Mr Speaker, sir.
26th of April. Thank you very much. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Tobacco and Vapes bill, second reading.
Now.
Minister to move second reading.
Mr Deputy Speaker, before I start, I should declare an interest. Before I was elected to Parliament, I used to prosecute serious organised crime, including organised crime gangs that attempted to import illicit cigarettes. I beg to move that that bill be now read a second time. For a moment, if I may, Mr Deputy Speaker, I would like us to imagine that we're not in this historic and magnificent chamber, but we are instead standing at the entrance of a local hospital. A patient comes through the doors, struggling to breathe. Smoking sent their asthma spiralling out of control. A minute later, another patient passes by. Smoking caused the heart disease they're battling. A minute later, another person comes in, and then another. This vicious cycle repeats itself nearly every minute of every day in our national health system. Because here in the United Kingdom, almost one hospital admission a minute is the human cost of smoking. Smoking leaves people with premature dementia. It puts them in care, attached to oxygen for the rest of their life. It increases the risk of stillbirth by almost 50%. It is responsible for 75,000 GP appointments every month. And it takes around 80,000 lives every year.
We should give way on that point.
I will give way.
I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for giving way. I urge anyone who's come into this debate today to go to a respiratory ward, as I served on for a year in my first junior doctor role, to watch people gasp for breath, struggle and fight with their relatives there asking you to do something as a doctor, and you simply can't. If this is a step forward to stopping that situation, then I am very much in favour of the Secretary of State taking it forward.
Well, may I thank my honourable friend for bringing in his professional experience into the chamber and the real-life consequences that he has seen for his patients. I'm going to be unpacking, if I may, some of the details behind his invaluable intervention, but the premise behind this is exactly as he says, to stop the start. Because there is no safe level of smoking and no safe tobacco product. In fact, it is the only product that if it is consumed as the manufacturer intends, it will kill 2/3 of its long-term users. Now, this bill is not about demonising people who smoke or stopping them from buying tobacco if they're able to today. It will not affect current smokers' rights or entitlements in any way. And indeed, we want to help them to quit. We are supporting them by almost doubling the funding for local smoking services. But instead, this bill is looking to the future to give the next generation the freedom to live longer, healthier, more productive lives. I will.
How does she counter the Conservative argument that if you ban something, you massively increase criminality?
Well, I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend on that, and I'm genuinely going to come on to that because I know that is a concern that colleagues have, and I'm going to develop my arguments if I may. But as I say, reminding him of my declaration of interest, believe you me, I have no interest whatsoever in making life easier for smoking gangs, and this is why I will be announcing as part of this package further funding, further investment for law enforcement agencies, both at the border and also at local level. But some have said, well, this is, and I understand the argument, that the concern that we are banning things. I totally understand the concerns of fellow Conservatives. We are not in the habit of banning things. We do not like that. And so we will only bring these powers in when we are convinced, following a, no doubt, robust debate with the intellectual self-confidence that we have to have such debates on this side of the House, we come to the conclusion that there is no liberty in addiction. Nicotine robs people of their freedom to choose. The vast majority of smokers start when they are young, and 3/4 say that if they could turn back the clock, they would not have started. That is why, through this bill, we are creating a smoke-free generation that will guarantee that no one who is turning 15 or younger this year will ever be legally sold tobacco, saving them from the misery of repeated attempts to give up, making our economy more productive and building an NHS that delivers faster, simpler and fairer care. I would argue it is our responsibility, indeed our duty, to protect the next generation, and this is what this bill will do. I will give way to that.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way, and she's absolutely right that we should protect the next generation. Labour proposed the smoke-free generation legislation in January 2023. We voted to crack down on marketing vapes to children in 2021. It was the Tories who blocked it. Now, I welcome this bill, but doesn't it just show, well, one, that where Labour leads, some of the Conservatives follow, but isn't she concerned about the number of her colleagues who we can see lined up who are going to vote against this legislation today?
I think that's a brave submission from the Honourable Lady, given the debate in yesterday's in the Chamber yesterday. And I certainly won't be taking lectures from Labour on this legislation. The reason that we are bringing this forward is because we have looked carefully at the evidence, and what is more, we have tempered it so that existing adult smokers will not be affected. If the message from the Labour Party is they want to ban smoking completely of adults, then it is for them to make that argument. But we have tempered this carefully to ensure that this only deals with future generations. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and I commend her for her approach to young people smoking, for her determination to deal with illegal tobacco, and for her crackdown on vaping, which is a menace to young people, as these things are sold like an item of confectionery. But will she accept that in doing all of those things, that she needs to be open-minded to how this bill can be improved? For the idea of a rolling age of consent, with the consequence that someone of 35 will be able to buy tobacco, someone of 34 not, and so on and so forth, is at best a curiosity and at worst an absurdity.
I'm extremely grateful to my right honourable friend and indeed my close Lincolnshire neighbour. I mean, he knows that with any piece of legislation, of course, I will always want to listen to colleagues and to do business. I would just, however, make the point that the principles behind this legislation is that this generation, these emerging generations, will never take up smoking. That is the point. And so I'll just finish this point, please. And so that is why we are bringing this forward, so that we stop the start from 2027 and future generations will not have that addiction to nicotine. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady, and then I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm very grateful, and I would say it from the outset, I completely support this bill. Can I say that in Newham, 22% of the sales last year they found was to underage children, higher than alcohol, knives, fireworks, etc. They seized £135,000 worth of illicit tobacco projects in just 6 months. So can I ask the Minister, will she ensure that councils will get the resources they need to be able to continue the vital work of keeping these products out of the hands of the young?
Yes, I can assure her, because not only is the illicit trade often the greatest in the most deprived areas of the country, but as I say, I'm about to develop exactly how we're going to help law enforcement with this, because I do very much understand the concerns across the House about ensuring that the illicit trade does not flourish. I'll give way to my right honourable friend and then to the honourable gentleman.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Has she seen the latest statistics that say twice as many school children smoke cannabis as smoke tobacco? Yeah. It's already illegal for all of us, not just children, for all of us, to smoke cannabis. If a ban really worked, how can she explain those statistics, and how can she show that this ban, stopping people who are currently 15, will be different than the anti-drugs legislation we already have?
Well, just so I'm clear, I don't think, is my honourable friend suggesting that we repeal the Misuse of Drugs Act 1973, under which cannabis is prohibited? And of course, although I have no experience of it myself, I understand that the consumption of marijuana does also involve the consumption of tobacco and of cigarette papers. The point for this is that we are trying to move away from this idea that teenagers, current youngsters, will be able to buy their cigarettes legally in shops from the age of 18 in 2027, precisely because we want to ensure that they can lead longer, healthier lives. And I will be coming on in a moment to some of the stories that the tobacco industry have put around about the myths of the impact of introducing age restrictions in cigarettes, which I think will be of interesting evidence to those who are concerned about this. I'll give way, if I may, finally to the honourable gentleman, and then I'll make some progress.
First of all, Mr Deputy Speaker, can I commend the Minister and the Government for bringing this forward? I'm personally of a mind to support it because I believe it's right. That's my opinion in relation to it. But I have been contacted by the vaping groups. I met the Honourable Member for East Belfast, myself, met some groups of them last week, and they sent me a small comment. I want to ask the Minister a quick question, if I can, in relation to that, so that we're moving forward with the consistency to try and achieve something. They referred to the impact assessment report by the Department for Health and Social Care. They say it fails to consider potentially detrimental effects of restriction of both vape users and those smokers looking to switch. And what they've asked for, and it's to be helpful, I always try, I think we all try, Madam Mr Deputy, to be helpful in our comments in this chamber, to be constructive. So being constructive, they refer to a request to include a vape retailer and distributor licensing scheme in the bill. The industry have developed a comprehensive framework for such a scheme, which is designed to once and for all deal effectively with the issue of underage and illicit vape sales, a situation which could potentially only get worse. Can I ask the Minister, would it be the Minister's intention to do just that, to develop a vape retailer and distributor licensing scheme? Thanks so much.
I'm extremely grateful to the honourable gentleman. I thank him for his support. We understand the level of lobbying that has been undertaken both by the vaping industry and by the tobacco industry, and we know, of course, that the vaping industry has pushed this as one of their lines. I'm afraid the truth is that when you look at the current market of vapes, when you walk into a local shop, a newsagent, something of that nature, and you see the vape products on sale next to the till, often next to the sweets, where children are, probably certainly going to be very attracted to that part of the shop if my experiences are anything to go by. And they do that and they market it in very, very cynical ways. And so what we are saying is it is already unlawful to sell vapes to under 18s, but we want to take the powers in this legislation to consult on, for example, flavours, design and so on, to ensure that vapes are being sold as they should be, as they are intended, in order to help adult smokers to quit, because no child should ever vape. I'm going to make a little bit of progress, if I may, because I do want to come on to the age of sale, and then, of course, I'll give way. And so the point that my right honourable friend raised about the age of sale in the black market, the tobacco industry claims that there will be unintended consequences from raising the age of sale. They assert that the black market will boom. Before the smoking age was increased from 16 to 18, they sang from the same hymn sheet. But the facts, I'm afraid, showed otherwise. The number of illicit cigarettes consumed fell by 25%, and the smoking rates for 16 and 17-year-olds dropped by almost a third. Indeed, consumption of illegal tobacco has plummeted from 17 billion cigarettes in 2000 and 2001 to 3 billion cigarettes in 2022-23. This is despite, of course, the further controls that this House have placed in the meantime. And indeed, our modelling suggests that the measures in this bill will reduce smoking rates among 14 to 30-year-olds in England to close to zero as soon as 2040. I hope there will be many of us in this chamber today who will still be here in 2040, and this is our opportunity to play that part in history. Thanks to constructive engagement from colleagues across the devolved administrations, these measures will apply not just in England, but across our entire United Kingdom, saving lives and building a brighter future. And having listened carefully to colleagues' concerns around enforcement, we are making sure that local authorities will be able to keep every penny of the fixed penalties they bring in to reinvest in rigorous enforcement. In other words, we are looking not just at national enforcement, but also helping our very, very important and valuable local trading enforcement officers to keep the proceeds from those fixed penalties they hand out. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady, my right honourable friend. Sorry.
Thank you very much for giving me away. Does she agree with me that this bill will not largely affect people in this House, but affects younger people? And therefore it's incredibly important to listen to the voices of young people in this. With this in mind, I wrote to every secondary school in my constituency to ask young people their views. The majority of the young people in Chelmsford, when asked for their views, said that they would support the measures in the bill. It's not unanimous, but we work by majority, and given that this affects them and not me, I will be respecting their views.